At the iron gates of Lone Star Ranch, a woman collapses in the Texas dust, her pregnant belly round beneath torn clothing. She's unconscious, alone, and carrying secrets that could change everything. The man who finds her is Jack Morrison, a wealthy rancher who spent the last 10 years avoiding any human connection deeper than a handshake. His fortune built on oil and cattle, his heart locked away since tragedy struck his family. But something about this stranger's silent desperation awakens feelings he thought were buried forever. In the span of a single afternoon, while she lies unconscious in his guest room, Jack makes a decision that will bind their lives together in ways neither could imagine. What drives a man to marry a woman he's never spoken to? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sprawling expanse of Lone Star Ranch, its golden light catching the chrome of oil derricks that dotted the horizon like steel sentinels. Jack Morrison stood on his wraparound porch, coffee mug in hand, surveying the empire he'd built from nothing but determination and the kind of luck that comes to those who work 18-hour days. 20,000 acres of prime Texas grassland stretched before him, home to 3,000 head of Black Angus cattle and 17 active oil wells that had made him one of the wealthiest men in the state. At 52, Jack carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd learned that money couldn't buy the things that mattered most, but it sure could provide a comfortable distance from the world's sharp edges. His weathered hands wrapped around the ceramic mug, a simple white cup that had belonged to his late wife, Sarah. Everything else had been packed away 10 years ago, but somehow this one piece remained, a daily reminder of morning conversations that would never come again. The ranch house itself was a testament to understated prosperity. Built from native limestone and aged cedar, it sprawled across a gentle rise overlooking the main pasture. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a kitchen large enough to feed a crew, and a living room with windows that framed the Texas sky like a painting. Sarah had designed it all, sketching plans on napkins during their early years when dreams seemed as vast as the land they'd claimed together. Morning, boss. Miguel Hernandez emerged from the barn, his boots crunching on the gravel path. At 65, the foreman moved with the careful precision of a man whose body had spent 4 decades working cattle and mending fence. His face, carved by sun and wind into deep lines, held the kind of wisdom that came from watching seasons turn and understanding that life moved in cycles, some gentle, some harsh, all part of a larger pattern. Miguel, Jack nodded, appreciating the man's consistent presence. In a world where loyalty seemed as scarce as rain in August, Miguel had remained constant through prosperity and grief alike. How's the south pasture looking? Good grass, plenty of water. Might want to move the herd there next week. Miguel paused, studying Jack's face with the familiarity of long friendship. You seem restless this morning. Jack couldn't argue with that observation. Something had been stirring in him lately, a restlessness that reminded him of storm clouds gathering on a clear day. Maybe it was the anniversary approaching, 10 years since the accident that had torn his world in half. Or maybe it was simply the recognition that he'd been standing still for too long, watching life pass by from behind the safe boundaries of his ranch. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent his 20s and 30s building this place, creating something that could shelter a family, provide security for generations. Then, when he'd finally had everything in place, the house, the land, the promise of children, it had all been taken away in a single moment on a rain-slicked highway. Sarah had been 8 months pregnant when the drunk driver ran the red light. The doctors said she'd died instantly, along with the son they'd planned to name David. Jack had spent weeks in the hospital, his own injuries keeping him bedridden while he processed the magnitude of his loss. The drunk driver had walked away, with minor scratches and a suspended license. Since then, Jack had retreated into the rhythms of ranch life, finding solace in the predictable cycles of cattle and crops, oil production, and market prices. He employed 37 people directly, supported countless more through contracts and services, and had quietly donated millions to local schools and medical facilities. But he'd kept his heart carefully locked away, wearing his grief like armor against any possibility of future pain. "Boss!" Miguel's voice cut through his reverie. "There's someone at the front gate." Jack followed Miguel's gaze toward the entrance to the ranch, where the iron gate stood open during daylight hours. A figure was moving unsteadily along the gravel drive, though at this distance he couldn't make out details. "Probably another reporter," Jack muttered. Success bred curiosity, and his wealth had made him a target for journalists looking for colorful stories about Texas oil money. "I'll handle it." But as they drew closer in Jack's pickup truck, it became clear this wasn't a reporter. A young woman stumbled along the drive, her dark hair matted with dust and sweat, one hand pressed protectively over her swollen belly. Her clothes were torn and dirty, as if she'd been walking for miles. Even from 50 yards away, Jack could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. Then she collapsed. Jack was out of the truck before it fully stopped, his boots hitting the gravel at a run. The woman lay crumpled near the cattle guard, her breathing shallow but steady. Up close, he could see she was probably in her late 20s, with olive skin and features that spoke of Hispanic heritage. Her pregnancy was advanced, 7 or 8 months, he guessed, and her left wrist bore a hospital bracelet that had been cut off hastily. "Ma'am," he knelt beside her, checking for obvious injuries. "Can you hear me?" No response. Miguel appeared. At his shoulder, his weathered face creased with concern. "Call Dr. Chen," Jack said quietly. "Tell her it's urgent." While Miguel made the call, Jack carefully lifted the unconscious woman, surprised by how light she felt despite her pregnancy. She stirred slightly in his arms, murmuring something in Spanish that he couldn't catch, then fell still again. The guest house sat about 100 yards from the main residence, a smaller version of the ranch house that Sarah had envisioned for. Visiting family. It had been empty for years, but Rosa Hernandez, Miguel's wife and the ranch's housekeeper, kept it ready as if guests might arrive at any moment. Dios mío! Rosa breathed when she saw them coming. At 60, she maintained the bustling energy of a woman half her age, her silver hair always perfectly arranged despite the ranch's demands. "What happened to her?" "Don't know yet," Jack replied, carrying his burden into the guest bedroom. "Dr. Chen's on her way." As he laid the woman on the bed, something fell from her pocket. A crumpled ultrasound image, the kind expectant mothers carried as proof of the miracle growing within them. Jack picked it up, studying the grainy black-and-white image that showed a clearly formed baby, the date indicating it was only 2 weeks old. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived within 20 minutes of Miguel's call, her compact frame belying the authority she commanded as the county's most respected physician. In her 50s, with graying black hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, she'd delivered half the children in the county and buried their grandparents with equal compassion. "Any idea who she is?" Dr. Chen asked as she examined the unconscious woman. "None. Found her collapsed at the front gate." Jack watched from the doorway, reluctant to intrude, but unable to leave. Hospital bracelet was cut off. Dr. Chen's examination was thorough but gentle. After 15 minutes, she straightened with a thoughtful expression. "She's dehydrated and exhausted but stable. The baby seems fine. Strong heartbeat, good positioning. She's probably been walking for hours, maybe days. Whatever she was running from, she was desperate enough to risk her child's life." The implications of that statement settled over Jack like a heavy blanket. Women didn't cut off hospital bracelets and walk miles in the Texas heat unless they were fleeing something terrible. "Will she be all right?" "With rest and fluids, yes. She should wake up in the next few hours." Dr. Chen packed her instruments with practiced efficiency. "I should report this, Jack. A pregnant woman found unconscious, evidence she left medical." "Care abruptly. There are protocols." Jack found himself shaking his head before she finished speaking. Give it 24 hours. Let her wake up. Let her tell us what happened. If she's running from something dangerous, getting authorities involved might put her in more danger. Dr. Chen studied his face with the penetrating gaze that had served her well in 40 years of medical practice. This isn't like you, Jack. You've always been careful about getting involved in other people's problems. She was right, of course. For 10 years, he'd maintained careful boundaries, helping people through charitable donations and business opportunities, but never allowing personal involvement. Yet something about this woman's desperate flight had stirred something deep within him, a protective instinct he'd thought was buried with his wife and unborn son. 24 hours, he repeated. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. I'll check on her tomorrow. But Jack, if she doesn't wake up, or if there are complications, we call the authorities immediately. After the doctor left, Jack found himself unable to concentrate on the usual ranch business. Miguel handled the cattle rotation, Rosa prepared meals that went largely untouched, and Jack wandered between the main house and the guest house like a man caught between two worlds. As afternoon faded into evening, he sat on the guest house porch, ostensibly reading reports from his oil production manager, but actually listening for any sound from the bedroom where the mysterious woman rested. Rosa had changed her into clean clothes, a simple dress that had belonged to Sarah, kept in the guest house closet for reasons neither of them had ever discussed. Night fell across the ranch with the dramatic flair that belonged uniquely to Texas. The sky painting itself in shades of orange and purple before surrendering to velvet darkness studded with stars. Jack remained on the porch, unwilling to leave his vigil, haunted by questions he couldn't answer. Who was she? What had driven her to walk miles in her condition? And why did her presence stir feelings he'd spent 10 years trying to bury? Around midnight, a sound from inside the house made him straighten. A voice, weak but distinct, speaking in Spanish. Jack rose and moved quietly to the bedroom door, not wanting to startle her but needing to know she was all right. She was sitting up. In bed, one hand pressed to her temple, the other resting protectively over her belly. In the soft lamplight, he could see her face clearly for the first time. Delicate features marked by exhaustion and fear, dark eyes that held depths of experience no woman her age should possess. Their gazes met across the threshold, and for a moment neither spoke. Then she whispered something that changed everything. "Thank you for not letting me die." The words hit Jack like a physical blow, carrying implications that went far beyond simple gratitude. This wasn't just a woman who'd collapsed from exhaustion. This was someone who'd been running toward death and found life instead, here at his gates, in the sanctuary he'd built from his own ashes. Without conscious thought, Jack found himself moving toward the bedside table where he'd placed the ultrasound image. He picked it up, studying the grainy proof of life within her, and made a decision that would have shocked him if he'd stopped to analyze it. In that moment, looking at this broken woman carrying new life, Jack Morrison decided to take the biggest risk he'd taken in 10 years. He was going to get involved completely and irrevocably in a way that would either heal them both or destroy the careful equilibrium he'd built from the ruins of his former life. The chain around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt, held a simple gold band, Sarah's wedding ring, the one he'd never been able to bury with her. Tomorrow, for the first time in a decade, Jack Morrison was going to take a leap of faith. The woman's eyes widened as she took in her surroundings. The unfamiliar room, the clean clothes, the man standing quietly in the doorway, holding what appeared to be her ultrasound photo. Her hand moved instinctively to her left wrist, fingers probing the spot where the hospital bracelet had been. "Where am I?" Her voice carried a slight accent, musical despite the fear that threaded through it. "My guest house, Lone Star Ranch." Jack kept his distance, recognizing the wariness of someone who'd learned to be afraid. "You collapsed at my front gate. Dr. Chen checked you over. You and the baby are going to be fine." She closed her eyes, relief washing over her features. "How long was I unconscious?" About 12 hours. It's just past midnight now. Jack moved slowly to the chair beside the bed, telegraphing his intentions. What's your name? Elena. The answer came after a pause, as if she was testing the truth of it. Elena Vasquez. I'm Jack Morrison. This is my ranch. He studied her face, noting the way her eyes darted to the windows, calculating distances and escape routes. Elena, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully before you react. Fear flickered across her features. What did you do? Jack reached into his shirt and pulled out the chain, Sarah's wedding ring catching the lamplight. He'd worn it against his heart for 10 years, a talisman of love and loss. Now, for the first time since Sarah's death, he slipped it from his finger. When Dr. Chen examined you, she found evidence that you'd left medical care abruptly. The way your hospital bracelet was cut, your condition when we found you, it suggested you were running from something dangerous. Jack's voice remained steady, though his heart was racing. I made a decision while you were unconscious. I married you. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Elena stared at him, her dark eyes processing what he'd said, with the careful attention of someone accustomed to parsing threats from promises. That's impossible, she whispered. Texas law allows proxy marriage in emergency circumstances. I have a family lawyer who's been with me for 20 years and a judge who's known me since I was 25. Jack's explanation came out measured, each word chosen carefully. The marriage gives you legal protection, spousal privilege, immigration, status if you need it, and most importantly, it makes you part of a family that has resources to protect you. Elena's breathing had quickened, her hand pressed against her belly, as if shielding her unborn child from this new uncertainty. You don't understand what you've done. You don't know what I'm running from. Then tell me. For a long moment, she studied his face, searching for something he couldn't name. Whatever she found there seemed to steady her, because she nodded slowly. My husband's name is Marcus Delgado, Detective Marcus Delgado, of the Houston Police Department. The title carried a weight that made Jack's chest tighten. He's been beating me for 3 years. When I got pregnant, it got worse. He said if I ever tried to leave, he'd make sure I disappeared permanently, and no one would question the word of a decorated police officer about his unstable, runaway wife. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. A police officer. Husband would have resources, connections, the ability to track someone across state lines and make their life disappear into the system's cracks. The hospital bracelet? I was in emergency care 2 days ago. He put me there. Elena's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I told the nurse I'd fallen downstairs like always, but this time Dr. Martinez, she didn't believe me. She pulled me aside and said if I ever needed help, there were people who could protect me. She gave me a phone number and said sometimes the only way to save yourself is to run. Eleanor reached under the pillow and withdrew a small piece of paper, worn from handling. On it was written a phone number and a single word: hope. I waited until Marcus went to work, then I cut off the bracelet and walked out of the hospital. I had $40 and an ultrasound picture. I thought if I could get far enough away, maybe I could disappear. Her laugh held no humor. Stupid. Right, pregnant woman with no money, no car, thinking she could outrun a cop. Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in 10 years. A pure, driving need to protect someone else. Not from loneliness or financial hardship, but from genuine evil. Elena, what I did, marrying you while you were unconscious, it wasn't legal, not really. But it can be, if you want it to be. He leaned forward, his hands open on his knees. I can't undo your past, but I can make sure you have a future. You and your baby. Why? The question came out sharp, demanding. Why would you do this for a stranger? Jack touched the wedding ring that now hung loose on the chain, no longer tight against his skin. 10 years ago, I lost my wife and unborn. Son in a car accident. Since then, I've been existing. Not living, just existing. When I found you at my gate, carrying new life, fighting for survival, he paused. searching for words that could capture the seismic shift happening inside. Him. Maybe some people come into our lives to save us from ourselves. Elena was quiet for several minutes, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly. Jack could see her thinking, weighing options, calculating risks with the grim precision of someone who'd learned that one wrong choice could be fatal. If I stay, if I go through with this marriage, Marcus will find me eventually. He won't stop looking, and when he does find me, he'll hurt anyone who helped me. She met Jack's eyes directly. Are you prepared for that? Yes. The simple certainty of his answer seemed to surprise them both. Jack hadn't planned to feel this sure, hadn't expected the protective instinct to surge through him with such clarity. But sitting here, looking at this woman who'd risked everything to save her unborn child, he knew he'd rather face whatever came than let her disappear back into the darkness she'd escaped. There's something else, Eleanor said quietly. The baby, it's not Marcus's. Jack waited, sensing there was more to this revelation. Marcus was sterile, military injury from before we met. He knew the baby wasn't his from the moment I told him I was pregnant. Elena's voice strengthened as she spoke, as if saying the truth aloud gave her power. That's when the beatings really started. He was convinced I was having an affair, which I wasn't. The baby... She paused, her hand stilling on her belly. I was raped 3 months after our marriage. I never told Marcus the truth because I knew he'd kill me. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Jack felt his own anger building, not at Elena, but at the series of betrayals and violence that had brought her to his gate. Does it matter to you? She asked. About the babies. Father? Jack thought of Sarah, of the son they'd lost, of the family that had been stolen from him by a drunk driver's carelessness. He thought of this woman's courage, walking miles in the Texas heat to save a child conceived in violence, but carried with love. The only thing that matters is that you want this baby, and you're willing to fight for both of your lives. Jack reached out slowly, giving Elena time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, he covered her hand with his. If you'll have me, Eleanor, I'd like to help you fight. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, Jack Morrison. Let's get married. For real this time. The decision settled between them with surprising ease, as if they were discussing ranch business rather than binding their lives together. But Jack could see the relief in Elena's eyes, the first real hope she'd probably felt in years. Outside, the Texas night stretched endlessly toward dawn, full of possibilities neither of them had dared imagine when the sun set. In a few hours, they would begin the legal process of becoming husband and wife. Elena would trade her nightmare for sanctuary, and Jack would trade his careful solitude for the beautiful uncertainty of caring about someone again. Neither of them could foresee the storm that was already gathering, as Marcus Delgado discovered his wife had vanished from the hospital without a trace. They couldn't know that he was already making calls, pulling strings, using his badge and his connections to begin a hunt that would eventually lead him to the iron gates of Lone Star Ranch. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of the guest house, they had hope, and sometimes hope was enough to build a future on. Dawn broke over Lone Star Ranch with the gentle persistence of hope itself, painting the sky in soft pastels that reflected off the dew-covered grass. Elena woke to the sound of cattle lowing in the distance and the unfamiliar comfort of safety. For the first time in 3 years, she'd slept without fear, without listening for the sound of Marcus's key in the lock or his footsteps on the stairs. Jack appeared at the guest house door around 7, carrying a breakfast tray and wearing the careful expression of a man walking uncharted territory. He'd clearly been up for hours. His hair was damp from a shower, and he wore clean jeans and a pressed shirt that suggested he'd put thought into this first morning of their unconventional marriage. "Morning," he said quietly, setting the tray. On the bedside table, Rosa made enough food for a small army. She's excited to have someone to cook for again. Eleanor pushed herself up against the pillows, accepting the coffee gratefully. How does she feel about your sudden marriage to a stranger? Rosa believes in divine providence and second chances. She also believes you arrived here for a reason. Jack settled into the chair he'd occupied the night before, maintaining respectful distance. Miguel's more skeptical, but he'll come around. They both will, once they see you're not going anywhere. The assumption that she was staying, that this arrangement would last beyond the immediate crisis, should have felt presumptuous. Instead, it felt like the first solid ground Elena had stood on in years. About the legal aspects, Jack continued, pulling a folder from under his arm. I spoke with my lawyer early this morning. We can make the marriage official today if you're still willing. It'll require a trip to the courthouse, some paperwork, but nothing complicated. Eleanor nodded, then hesitated. Jack, what exactly are you expecting from this marriage? I need to understand the terms. Separate bedrooms, no physical expectations, complete respect for your autonomy. His answer came without hesitation. This is about protection and partnership, not romance. If feelings develop over time, we'll address that when it happens. If they don't, we'll still be family. The word family hit Elena unexpectedly hard. She'd been alone for so long, even during her marriage to Marcus, that she'd forgotten what. It felt like to belong somewhere. After breakfast, Jack showed her around the ranch proper. Elena had glimpsed its scope from the guest house, but walking the property revealed the true magnitude of what Jack had built. The main house sat at the heart of it all, surrounded by barns, equipment sheds, and the various structures needed to run a working cattle operation. This is the main barn, Jack explained, sliding open doors that revealed a spotless interior. We keep the breeding stock here during calving season. Elena stepped inside, breathing in the rich scents of hay and leather. In one of the stalls, a young calf nuzzled against its mother, the picture of perfect contentment. Without thinking, Elena reached out to stroke the calf's soft coat. When I was little, my grandmother had a small farm outside San Antonio, she said softly. I used to help her feed the chickens and milk the cow. I always dreamed of having animals again someday. Jack watched her gentle interaction with the calf, seeing something relax in her shoulders for the first time since she'd arrived. You're welcome here, Elena. All of it. The animals, the land, the house. It's all part of what I'm offering. They continued the tour, Jack pointing out the oil derricks that dotted the property, explaining the business that had made his fortune while cattle ranching remained his passion. Elena asked intelligent questions about herd management and crop rotation, surprising Jack with her understanding of agricultural principles. My grandmother taught me to read the land, she explained when he commented on her knowledge. She said, you could tell everything about a place by watching how the animals behaved and how the grass grew. Around noon, they drove into town for the courthouse visit. The county clerk, a woman in her 60s named Betty, had known Jack since he'd first bought the ranch. Her eyebrows rose when he introduced Elena as his fiancée, but she kept her questions to the necessary legal minimums. You'll need witnesses, Betty explained, stamping forms with official precision. Miguel and Rosa had followed them into town, Miguel still wearing his skeptical expression, but Rosa beaming as if she'd personally arranged this romance. They stood beside Jack and Elena as Judge Harrison performed the brief ceremony, his weathered face kind but curious about the unusual circumstances. Do you, Jack Morrison, take Elena Vasquez to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Elena? Vasquez, take Jack Morrison to be your lawfully wedded husband? Elena's voice was steady, carrying the weight of someone making a choice that could save her life. I do. The rings were simple gold bands from the courthouse jewelry store, temporary until something more permanent could be arranged. When Jack slipped the ring onto Elena's finger, she felt the symbolism of it. Protection, commitment, the promise of a future that belonged to her. Back at the ranch, Dr. Chen arrived for Elena's first prenatal appointment as a married woman. The examination took place in the guest house bedroom, Elena lying on the bed while Dr. Chen moved the ultrasound wand across her belly. Everything looks perfect. Dr. Chen announced, pointing to the screen where their baby moved with increasing vigor. Strong heartbeat, good positioning, probably about 32 weeks along. Elena stared at the image, her throat tight with emotion. For the first time, she was seeing her baby not as evidence of violence or a source of Marcus's rage, but as a pure possibility, a new life that would know nothing but love and protection. Jack stood in the doorway, having asked permission to witness this moment. When he saw the baby's profile on the screen, something shifted in his chest, a recognition that this child would be his in every way that mattered, regardless of biology. "Would you like to know the sex?" Dr. Chen asked. Elena looked at Jack, seeking his opinion. He nodded encouragingly. "It's a girl," Dr. Chen smiled. "A healthy, active little girl." Elena's tears came then, unstoppable and cleansing. Jack moved to the bedside without thinking, taking her hand as she cried for everything she'd lost and everything she'd found. "A daughter," Elena whispered, studying the ultrasound image that Dr. Chen printed for them. "I'm going to have a daughter." "We're going to have a daughter," Jack corrected gently, and Elena's smile could have lit up the entire ranch. That evening they sat on the guest house porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Elena wore one of Sarah's dresses, a simple blue cotton that Rosa had altered to accommodate her pregnancy. The ultrasound photo sat on the table between them, already precious beyond measure. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find this." "Was all a dream," Elena admitted, her hand resting on her belly, where their daughter grew stronger each day. "It's real," Jack assured her. "You're safe, you're protected, and you're going to be an incredible mother." Elena studied his profile in the fading light, seeing strength and gentleness in equal measure. "What do we do now? We take it one day at a time. We prepare for the baby, we run the ranch, and we become the family we both need." Jack's voice carried the quiet confidence of a man who'd found his purpose again after years of drifting. And when Marcus comes looking, he'll find out that some lines shouldn't be crossed. Jack's tone remained calm. But Elena heard the steel beneath it. "You're not alone anymore, Elena. Whatever comes, we face it together." The ultrasound photo fluttered slightly in the evening breeze, held down by Elena's protective hand. In that grainy black and white image lay their future, a little girl who would know nothing but love, raised on a ranch where safety was measured in acres, and strength was measured in the quiet determination of two people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment. Neither of them noticed the strange car that had driven slowly past the ranch gates twice that afternoon, or the man inside it taking careful notes about the property's layout and security measures. Marcus Delgado was patient, methodical, and absolutely determined to reclaim what he considered his property. But for now, Elena and Jack sat in peaceful ignorance of the storm gathering on their horizon, planning a future that felt as vast and full of possibility as the Texas sky above them. 3 weeks into their marriage, Elena had established a rhythm that surprised them both with its naturalness. She woke early, joining Jack for coffee on the main house porch before he began his daily rounds. Their conversations had evolved from careful politeness to genuine companionship, touching on everything from cattle prices to Elena's memories of her grandmother's farm. "The south pasture rotation you suggested is working better than I expected," Jack admitted one morning, reviewing production reports. "Miguel says the grass recovery time has improved by 30%. Elena felt a flush of pride at the compliment. "My grandmother always said cattle are like people. They do better when they don't wear out their welcome in any one place." Speaking of not wearing out welcomes, Jack set down his coffee cup. "I've been thinking about the guest house arrangement. It made sense initially, but now that we're legally married, it might look odd to outsiders if you're not living in the main house." Elena had been expecting this conversation, though she wasn't sure how she felt about it. The guest house had been her sanctuary, a space where she could process the dramatic changes in her life without feeling like she was imposing on Jack's established routines. "You have a point," she said carefully. "What did you have in mind?" "The master bedroom has its own sitting area and bathroom. You could have complete privacy while still being in the main house." Or Jack paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "There's another bedroom that's been closed off for years. It was supposed to be a nursery." The admission hung between them, heavy with unspoken grief. Elena reached across the space between their chairs and touched Jack's hand. "Show me," she said simply. The nursery was at the end of the upstairs hallway, its door painted white, but unmarked by any nameplate or decoration. When Jack opened it, Elena stepped into a room frozen in time, pale, yellow walls, a crib still in its packaging, a rocking chair positioned by the window to catch morning light. "Sarah picked out everything," Jack said quietly. "I couldn't bring myself to return it after the accident, but I couldn't bear to look at it either." Elena walked to the window, looking out over the pasture where horses grazed peacefully. She could imagine sitting in that rocking chair, nursing their daughter while watching the sun rise over the land that would be her inheritance. "What if we transformed it together?" Elena suggested. "Keep what feels right, change what needs changing, make it ours instead of a shrine to what was lost." Jack's relief was visible. I'd like that very much." They spent the afternoon in the nursery, carefully unpacking items that had waited 10 years to fulfill their purpose. Rosa appeared periodically with suggestions and encouragement, treating the room's revival as a celebration rather than a somber duty. "This crib is beautiful," Elena said, running her hand along the carved wood rails. "Was it handmade?" "My grandfather made it for my father. My father used it for me." Jack tested the stability of the frame, finding it as solid as the day it was built. "I always hoped it would continue through the generations." Elena's smile was soft with understanding. "It will. Our daughter will sleep here, and maybe someday her children will too." The easy way she said "our daughter" made Jack's chest tighten with emotions he was still learning to navigate. This wasn't the family he'd planned 10 years ago, but it was becoming the family he needed now. That evening, Rosa arrived with an armload of old books and a determined expression. "Time for cooking lessons," she announced, settling Elena at the kitchen table with a collection of recipe cards written in careful Spanish script. "These belong to my mother, and her mother before that," Rosa explained, opening a wooden box filled with index cards brown with age. "Jack, he knows how to cook basic things, but a man needs to eat well if he's going to work hard." Elena picked up a card at random, studying the faded ink. "Mole poblano," she read aloud. "My grandmother made this for special occasions." "Good. We start with something you know." Rosa's eyes sparkled with anticipation. "Tomorrow we make mole. Tonight you learn my secret for perfect beans." For the next 2 hours, Elena absorbed Rosa's patient instruction, learning techniques passed down through generations of ranch wives. The kitchen filled with the scents of cumin and garlic, onions and cilantro, creating an atmosphere of warmth that the house hadn't known in years. Jack appeared in the doorway around 8, drawn by the cooking aromas and the sound of Elena's laughter as Rosa told stories about Miguel's early courtship attempts. He stood quietly, watching Eleanor's animated face as she stirred beans and absorbed family history, feeling something settle into place in his chest. "You're staring," Eleanor said without looking up from the stove. "Sorry, it's just the kitchen hasn't been this alive in a long time." Rosa made a satisfied sound. "A house needs life to be a home. Elena brings life." After Rosa left, Jack and Elena cleaned the kitchen together, their movements becoming synchronized in the way of people learning to share space. Elena washed dishes while Jack dried, their conversation flowing easily from ranch business to Elena's, growing comfort with her new life. "I called Dr. Martinez today," Elena said as she handed Jack a clean pot. "The nurse who helped me escape. I wanted to let her know I was safe." Jack paused in his drying. "What did she say?" she cried. Elena's voice was soft with emotion. She said she'd been praying for me every day since I disappeared. Apparently, Marcus has been calling the hospital regularly, claiming I was kidnapped and demanding information about where I might have gone. The mention of Marcus sent a chill through Jack's contentment. What did the hospital tell him? Nothing. Patient confidentiality. But Dr. Martinez warned me that he's hired a private investigator, someone who specializes in finding missing persons. Jack set down the dish towel, his full attention on Eleanor. Are you worried? I should be, Eleanor admitted, but I feel safer. Here than I've felt anywhere in years. This place, this life, it feels real in a way my old life never did. They finished cleaning in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As Eleanor headed toward the guest house, Jack caught her arm gently. Eleanor, about the nursery, would you like to move into the main house? Not for appearances, but because it might feel more like home? Elena considered this, studying Jack's face for any sign of pressure or expectation. She found only genuine care and the kind of patience that came from understanding what it meant to heal from trauma. Let me think about it, she said. I'm not ready yet, but I'm getting there. Jack nodded, releasing her arm. Take all the time you need. Home is a feeling, not a location. As Elena walked back to the guest house, she carried Rosa's recipe box and the comforting weight of belonging somewhere. The ultrasound photo was tucked carefully in the box, protected among recipes that represented generations of family tradition. She didn't see the headlights that passed the ranch entrance for the third time that week, or notice the telephoto lens that captured images of her evening routine from the cover of trees half a mile away. Marcus's investigator was patient and thorough, building a case file that would soon lead to a confrontation that would test every foundation Jack and Elena had built together. But tonight, Elena fell asleep, surrounded by the scents of cumin and promises, planning tomorrow's mole while their daughter moved peacefully within her, both of them protected by the quiet strength of a man who'd learned to fight for what mattered most. The private investigator arrived in town on a Tuesday morning, driving a nondescript sedan and carrying credentials that opened doors throughout the county. Thomas Brennan had 20 years of experience finding people who didn't want to be found, and Detective Marcus Delgado was paying him very well to locate one pregnant woman who disappeared without a trace. Elena knew none of this as she stood in the main barn, helping Miguel sort through breeding records. At 34 weeks pregnant, her belly had grown large enough to make simple tasks challenging, but she refused to be sidelined from ranch work that gave her purpose and peace. This bull's lineage goes back 4 generations, Miguel explained, pointing to entries in a leather-bound ledger. Jack's grandfather started this bloodline in 1952. Elena studied the careful handwriting that documented decades of careful breeding decisions. It's like a family tree, but for cattle. Sigh, exactly. Every animal on this ranch has a history, a purpose. Miguel's weathered face was serious. Jack, he understands this. Some people, they see cattle as just money. Jack sees them as legacy. The concept of legacy had become increasingly important to Elena as her pregnancy progressed. She wanted her daughter to inherit not just wealth, but the deeper values that had built this place. Hard work, respect for the land, and the kind of quiet integrity that couldn't be bought. Miguel, Elena said carefully, what do you really think about Jack marrying me? The foreman was quiet for several minutes, continuing to sort papers while he considered his answer. Miguel had worked for Jack through prosperity and tragedy, earning the right to speak honestly about personal matters. I think Jack was dying slowly before you came, he said finally. Not his body, but his spirit. A man needs something to protect, something to build for. You gave him that back. Elena felt the baby shift restlessly inside her, as if responding to the emotional weight of the conversation. I worry that I've brought danger to his peaceful life. Peace isn't always good, mija. Sometimes peace is just another word for giving up. Miguel's use of the endearing term surprised Eleanor. It was the first time he'd addressed her with familial warmth. Jack needed a reason to fight again. You and the baby, you gave him that. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a stranger at the barn door. The man was medium height, with sharp features, and the kind of confidence that came from years of getting answers from reluctant sources. "Excuse me," the stranger said, his voice carrying a slight Boston accent. "I'm looking for the ranch owner. I have some questions about a missing person case." Elena felt ice form in her veins, but Miguel stepped smoothly between her and the stranger, his body language shifting into protective mode. "Jack's out checking the north pasture," Miguel said evenly. "Might not be back for hours. What kind of questions?" The man pulled out a badge and a photograph. Elena couldn't see the image from her position behind Miguel, but she didn't need to. She knew exactly whose face was on that paper. "Thomas Brennan, licensed private investigator. I'm working with Houston PD on a missing person case. Elena Delgado, pregnant woman, disappeared from a hospital about 6 weeks ago. Her husband's been frantic with worry." Elena's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. The easy use of her married name to Marcus, the suggestion that he was worried rather than furious. It was all calculated to make her disappearance seem like a medical emergency rather than an escape from abuse. "Haven't seen anyone like that," Miguel replied without hesitation. "Mostly just ranch hands and cattle buyers out this way." Brennan's eyes were already scanning the barn, taking note of the ranch's obvious prosperity and the defensive positioning of the older man. "Mind if I take a look around? Sometimes people in crisis situations don't think clearly about where they're going." "This is private property," Miguel said firmly. "You'd need a warrant for that." "Of course." Brennan's smile was professional and completely cold. "But I'm sure you understand a husband's concern for his pregnant wife. If she's out there somewhere, confused and alone." Eleanor forced herself to remain still, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to run. From her position behind the feed bins, she could see Brennan's profile, the calculating eyes, the practiced sympathy that probably fooled most people. This was a man who made his living hunting people, and he was very good at his job. "I'll be in town for a few days," Brennan continued, handing Miguel a business card. "If anyone remembers seeing this woman, there's a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return." After Brennan left, Miguel waited 5 full minutes before turning to Elena. She was pressed against the wall, one hand on her belly, the other covering her mouth to muffle her panicked breathing. "He's here," she whispered. "Marcus found me." Miguel moved to the barn window, watching the investigator's car disappear down the gravel road. "No, mija, he sent someone to look. That's different. You don't understand. If that man finds me, if he tells Marcus where I am, then we make sure he doesn't find you." Miguel's voice carried the same calm authority that Elena had heard in Jack's. "But first, we need to tell Jack what's happening." They found Jack in the equipment shed, working on a piece of machinery with the focused attention that helped him think through complex problems. Miguel's whistle brought his head up, and one look at their faces told him something was seriously wrong. "The investigator?" Jack asked after Miguel finished explaining the encounter. "Professional, persistent, and well-funded," Miguel confirmed. "He's not going to give up after one conversation." Jack's jaw tightened as he processed the implications. He'd known this day would come, had prepared for it intellectually, but facing the reality of Elena's terror brought his protective instincts roaring to life. "Elena, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Jack said, his voice steady despite the fury building in his chest. "This changes nothing about our marriage or your safety here, but we need to be smarter about how we handle the next few days." Elena nodded, though Jack could see the fear in her eyes, not just for herself, but for the danger she'd brought to his peaceful life. "What do we do?" she asked. Jack reached into his shirt and pulled out the chain he'd worn for 10 years, Sarah's. Wedding ring caught the afternoon light, but for the first time since her death, Jack removed it completely and slipped it into his pocket. From the same pocket, he withdrew a different ring, a simple gold band that had belonged to his father. "We show them exactly what they expect to see," Jack said, sliding his father's ring onto his finger. A rancher and his pregnant wife, living quietly on their land. No secrets, no mysteries, just a family preparing for their first child. Elena stared at the ring on Jack's finger, understanding the significance of the gesture. He was publicly claiming their marriage, abandoning the last symbol of his attachment to the past in favor of protecting their future. "And if that doesn't work?" Elena asked. Jack's smile was grim but determined. "Then Mr. Brennan learns why some people shouldn't be hunted." The pocket watch in Jack's vest, his father's watch, passed down through 3 generations of Morrison men, ticked steadily against his chest. It had counted the minutes through cattle drives and oil strikes, through prosperity and loss, and now it would count down the hours until the confrontation that would determine whether Elena's new life could survive the shadows of her old one. Neither Elena nor Jack could foresee that Brennan was already planning his next move, having spotted enough during his brief barn visit to confirm he was on the right trail. The investigator's trained eye had noted the signs of recent female presence, the defensive behavior of the ranch hands, and most tellingly, the slight bulge of pregnancy beneath Elena's loose shirt as she'd tried to hide behind the feed bins. Hunt was intensifying, and Elena's carefully constructed sanctuary was about to face its first real test. That evening, Elena made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of retreating to the guest house, as had become her habit, she knocked on the door of Jack's study, carrying a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. "Come in," Jack called, looking up from the security reports he'd been reviewing since Brennan's visit. His desk was covered with photographs of the ranch's perimeter, notes about upgrading the gate system, and contact information for a private security firm he'd used for oil field protection. Elena entered slowly, her pregnancy making her movements. Careful and deliberate, she sat in the leather chair across from his desk, the bundle in her lap, and studied Jack's face with the intensity of someone making a life-altering decision. "I need to show you something," she said quietly. "Something I've never shown anyone." Jack set aside his papers, giving Eleanor his complete attention. In the weeks since their marriage, he'd learned to recognize the moments when she needed to share pieces of her past, not because he demanded it, but because healing required the gradual release of carefully guarded secrets. Elena unwrapped the cloth bundle, revealing a stack of $20 bills held together with a rubber band. The money was worn, creased from handling, and represented something far more significant than its modest face value. $3,400, Elena said, her voice steady but emotional. "Every dollar I could save during my marriage to Marcus without him noticing. $20 from grocery money, $40 from household expenses, sometimes just $5 or $10 hidden away for months." Jack stared at the money, understanding immediately what it represented. This wasn't just cash, it was hope, determination, and the kind of desperate planning that kept people alive in impossible situations. "I hid it in different places," Elena continued, "taped under drawers, sewn into coat linings, buried in the backyard in a waterproof container. Every time I added to it, I imagined the day I'd have enough to disappear with my baby." Elena, "No, let me finish." Her hand tightened on the bundle. "This money represents 3 years of planning my escape, 3 years of believing I might survive. When I ran from the hospital, this was all I had besides the clothes on my back." Jack felt something shift in his chest as he looked at this woman who'd had the courage to save herself $20 at a time, who'd planned her freedom with the patience of someone who understood that survival sometimes required years of preparation. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked gently. "Because I want to contribute to our household expenses. I want to pay for baby clothes, doctor visits, anything I can. I know it's not much compared to your wealth, but it's mine. It's the only thing I truly own." Elena's voice strengthened as she spoke. "I don't want to be rescued, Jack. I want to be a partner." The distinction hit Jack with unexpected force. In all his planning to protect Elena, he'd focused on providing safety and security without considering her need to maintain dignity and independence. This small stack of carefully saved bills represented her refusal to be diminished by either her past victimization or his present generosity. "Elena, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do." She stood up, her movements decisive despite her advanced pregnancy. "If we're going to face whatever's coming, I need to know I'm contributing something beyond just being protected. This baby is going to be born into a partnership, not a charity case." Jack rose from his chair and moved around the desk, stopping just close enough to see the determination in Elena's dark eyes. For the first time since their marriage, he felt the full force of her strength. Not the desperate courage that had carried her to his gates, but the quiet power of a woman who refused to be defined by what had been done to her. "Then we use your money for the nursery," Jack said finally. "Everything the baby needs, clothes, furniture we haven't inherited, toys, books, those purchases come from what you saved." Elena's smile was radiant. "Thank you for understanding. Thank you for trusting me with it." The moment stretched between them, charged with emotions neither was quite ready to name. Jack found himself stepping closer, drawn by Elena's courage and the growing connection that had been building through weeks of careful courtship disguised as practical arrangement. "Elena," he said softly, "there's something I need to tell you." "And two," she waited, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her belly, where their daughter grew stronger each day. "When I married you, when I made that decision while you were unconscious, it wasn't entirely altruistic." Jack's admission came out quietly, tinged with the vulnerability of a man unused to examining his own motivations. "I told myself it was about protection, about doing the right thing. But the truth is, finding you at my gates woke something in me that I thought was dead forever." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that what started as protection has become something deeper. I care about you, Elena. Not just as someone I'm helping, but as—" He paused, searching for words that could capture the complexity of what had grown between them, "as the woman I want to build a life with." Elena studied his face, seeing honesty and hope in equal measure. "Jack, I feel the same way, but I need you to understand something about me, about what Marcus did." "I don't care about your past," Jack interrupted gently. "I care about who you are now, who you're becoming. The rest is just history. But the baby is our daughter. Biology doesn't make a father, choice does. Love does." Jack's voice carried absolute certainty. "I choose to be her father, Eleanor. I choose to be your husband for real this time." The confession hung in the air between them, transforming their carefully maintained distance into something electric with possibility. Elena felt her heart racing, not with the fear that had dominated her life for years, but with the terrifying hope of someone discovering they might be worthy of love, after all. "Jack," she whispered, stepping closer until they were nearly touching, "I want that too. I want all of it." The kiss, when it finally happened, was gentle and tentative, the careful exploration of two people who'd been broken in different ways and were learning to trust again. Jack's hands framed Elena's face with reverent care, while she held onto his shoulders as if anchoring herself to this new reality. When they separated, Elena rested her forehead against Jack's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. The baby chose that moment to move vigorously, as if celebrating her parents' decision to become a real family. "She approves," Elena said with a laugh that held more joy than she'd felt in years. "Smart girl. She knows a good thing when she feels it." They stood together in the warm circle of the desk lamp's light, holding each other and the promise of a future neither had dared imagine just weeks before. Elena's carefully saved money remained on the desk, no longer a symbol of desperate escape, but proof of the strength and determination she brought to their partnership. Outside, night settled over the ranch with deceptive peace. Neither Jack nor Elena knew that Thomas Brennan had spent the day in town, showing Elena's photograph and asking careful questions. The investigator had already identified 3 people who remembered seeing a pregnant woman matching Elena's description, and tomorrow he would begin the systematic process of tracking her to their door. But tonight belonged to them, to the recognition that their marriage of convenience had become a love worth fighting for, and that their daughter would be born into a family built on choice rather than circumstance. 3 days after Eleanor and Jack's emotional breakthrough, Thomas Brennan returned to Lone Star Ranch with backup. This time, he wasn't alone. 2 patrol cars followed his sedan through the ranch gates, their occupants wearing the crisp uniforms of county sheriff's deputies. But it was the 4th vehicle that made Elena's blood turn to ice, a black SUV with Houston Police Department plates. Elena watched from the kitchen window as the convoy approached the main house, her coffee mug forgotten in her trembling hands. The morning had started peacefully, with Jack already out checking cattle and Elena helping Rosa plan meals for the coming week. Now, her carefully constructed sanctuary was about to be invaded by the very authority she'd fled. Marcus Delgado stepped out of the SUV with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to being obeyed. At 45, he was still imposing. 6 feet tall, with the kind of muscular build that came from regular gym sessions and the controlled violence of his profession. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his uniform immaculate, and his badge caught the morning sunlight like a weapon. Elena's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where their daughter responded to her mother's stress with agitated movement. 8 months pregnant now, Elena felt clumsy and vulnerable, her body betraying her with its obvious condition and limited mobility. Rosa appeared at Elena's shoulder, taking in the scene with the sharp assessment of a woman who'd lived through enough crises to recognize danger. "Go to the pantry," she whispered urgently. "There's a back way to the barn from there. Get Miguel." But it was too late. Brennan was already at the front door, his knock sharp and authoritative. Through the window, Elena could see Marcus positioning himself where he could observe all approaches to the house, while the deputies spread out to cover potential escape routes. "Mrs. Morrison?" Brennan called through the door. "I'm Detective Brennan, Houston PD. I need to speak with you and your husband about a missing person case." Elena felt a surge of dark irony. Brennan was introducing himself as a detective now, using Marcus's credentials to add official weight to his search. The web of lies and authority was closing around her with terrifying efficiency. Rosa squeezed Eleanor's shoulder. "You are Eleanor Morrison now," she whispered fiercely. "Remember that. You are Mrs. Morrison and this is your home." Elena nodded, drawing on reserves of strength she'd built over months of safety and love. She walked to the front door with as much dignity as her pregnancy allowed, Rosa flanking her like a protective guardian. When she opened the door, Marcus's eyes locked onto hers with the predatory intensity she remembered from their worst fights. For a moment, his professional mask slipped, revealing the rage and possessiveness that had driven him to hunt her across state lines. "Elena." Her name came out like a curse, though he quickly modulated his voice for the benefit of his audience. "Thank God you're safe. When you disappeared from the hospital, I was terrified something had happened to you and the baby." The performance was masterful. To the deputies and even to Brennan, Marcus appeared to be a concerned husband, overwhelmed with relief at finding his missing pregnant wife. Only Elena could see the calculation behind his eyes, the careful control that masked his fury at her escape. "I'm sorry," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt, "but I think there's been some mistake. I'm Eleanor Morrison. This is my home." Marcus's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Eleanor, sweetheart, I know you've been confused since the pregnancy. Complications. Dr. Williams warned me that stress might cause some memory issues." He turned to address Brennan and the deputies. "My wife's been under tremendous strain. The pregnancy has been difficult, and she's been having episodes of disorientation." Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Marcus was using her pregnancy against her, painting her as an unstable woman whose word couldn't be trusted. It was a devastating strategy that played into every stereotype about pregnant women being irrational and unreliable. "Detective Delgado," Brennan said formally, though Eleanor caught the slight emphasis that revealed his true allegiance. "Perhaps you could explain the situation for Mrs. Morrison and her family." Marcus pulled out his badge and identification, displaying them with the casual authority of a man accustomed to having doors opened and questions answered. "Detective Marcus Delgado, Houston PD. This is my wife, Elena Delgado. She disappeared from Methodist Hospital 6 weeks ago while receiving treatment for pregnancy complications and severe emotional distress." The badge gleamed in the morning sunlight. Not just any police badge, but the gold shield of a detective with 12 years of service and a spotless record. Elena stared at it with growing horror, understanding for the first time the true scope of what she was facing. The attending physician diagnosed her with severe postpartum anxiety and recommended immediate psychiatric evaluation. Marcus continued smoothly. Elena became agitated and somehow left the hospital before the evaluation could be completed. "We've been searching for her ever since, concerned for her safety and the baby's welfare." Elena felt Rosa's hand steady her as the implications crashed over her. Marcus wasn't just an abusive husband. He was a decorated police officer with the resources and credibility to make any story he chose seem plausible. His version of events transformed her escape from domestic violence into the delusions of an unstable pregnant woman. "I have documentation," Marcus said, producing a manila folder. "Hospital records, psychiatric evaluation requests, missing person reports." Elena's been suffering from severe anxiety and paranoid delusions. She's convinced I've been abusing her, despite medical records showing no evidence of domestic violence. Elena's throat constricted as she realized the depth of Marcus's planning. He'd been building a case against her sanity for months, probably years, creating a paper trail that would support any story he needed to tell. The hospital records he mentioned would show her injuries, but they'd be documented as accidents or self-inflicted wounds resulting from her mental instability. "Mrs. Morrison," one of the deputies said gently, "is there somewhere private we could talk? We just want to make sure you're safe and receiving proper medical care." Elena looked at the young deputy's concerned face and saw genuine worry rather than suspicion. He believed Marcus's story completely, viewing Elena as a victim in need of protection from her own confused mental state rather than from her abusive husband. "This is her home," Rosa said firmly, speaking up for the first time. "She is Elena Morrison, married to Jack Morrison. They have been married for 2 months. Marcus's laugh was perfectly calibrated to suggest gentle pity rather than anger. "Mrs. Hernandez, Rosa Hernandez, I am the housekeeper here. Mrs. Hernandez, I understand you want to protect Elena. She's very good at making people believe her stories. It's part of her condition. But I have legal documentation proving she's my wife and that she's been suffering from severe mental health issues." Marcus's voice carried the patient tone of a professional dealing with well-meaning but misguided civilians. Elena realized with dawning horror that Marcus had anticipated every aspect of her escape. He'd prepared for the possibility that she'd convince others to help her, creating a narrative that painted any support she found as the result of her manipulative delusions. The sound of a truck approaching at high speed cut through the tense conversation. Jack's pickup came to a sliding stop near the house, gravel spraying as he jumped out and took in the scene with the rapid assessment of a man accustomed to crisis management. "What's going on here?" Jack's voice carried the authority of someone on his own land, but Elena could see him calculating odds and positioning. "Mr. Morrison, I presume." Marcus stepped forward, extending his hand with professional courtesy. "Detective Marcus Delgado, Houston PD. I'm here to collect my wife and take her home for the medical care she desperately needs." Jack's eyes found Eleanor's across the space between them, and in that instant she saw him make the same calculations she had. Marcus wasn't just an abusive husband, He was a police officer with official authority, backup, and a carefully constructed story that painted Eleanor as an unreliable witness to her own life. "Your wife?" Jack's voice remained level, but Elena could hear steel underneath the civility. "Elena Delgado. We've been married for 4 years. Marcus produced a marriage certificate from his folder, the official document stating facts that couldn't be disputed. She disappeared from a Houston hospital during a psychiatric crisis. I've been searching for her ever since." Elena watched Jack's face as he processed the implications. Marcus's police badge changed everything, transforming their situation from a clear case of protecting an abuse victim into a complex legal nightmare involving potential kidnapping charges, interfering with police business, and harboring a mentally unstable person. The badge glinted in the morning sun like a promise of authority that could crush any resistance Jack might offer. Elena realized with crystalline clarity that all their careful planning, all their growing love, all their dreams for their daughter's future now hung on Jack's next decision. Would he fight an armed police officer on behalf of a woman whose word Marcus had systematically undermined, or would he step aside and let authority reclaim what it had come to collect? The Texas morning stretched taut with possibility and threat, while their unborn daughter moved restlessly in Elena's womb, as if sensing that her entire future was being decided in the space between heartbeats. The silence stretched like a tightrope over the ranch yard, everyone waiting for Jack's response to Marcus's revelation. Elena watched her husband's face, seeing him process the magnitude of what they were facing. Marcus wasn't just an abusive ex-husband, he was a decorated police detective with official authority, backup officers, and a carefully constructed narrative that painted Elena as mentally unstable. "That's interesting," Jack said finally, his voice carrying the controlled calm of a man who'd faced worse odds than these. "Because I have documentation too." Elena's heart stuttered as Jack reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small leather folder. She recognized it immediately, the same folder he'd carried to the courthouse the day they were married, though she'd never seen what else it contained. "Marriage certificate," Jack said, holding up the official document. "Elena Morrison, formerly Vasquez, married to John Morrison 2 months ago. Witnessed by Miguel and Rosa Hernandez, performed by Judge Harrison of Bexar County." Marcus's professional composure slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of genuine surprise. He'd anticipated many possibilities, but he hadn't expected Elena to have successfully married someone else. "That's impossible," Marcus said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Elena is already married to me. Bigamy is a felony." "Not if the first marriage was fraudulent," Jack replied calmly. "Elena has evidence that her marriage to you was obtained under duress, documented in hospital records and witness statements." Elena watched this chess match between the two men who claimed ownership of her life, feeling both protected and terrified by Jack's willingness to fight. But she could see the calculation in Marcus's eyes, the way he was reassessing the situation and preparing his next move. "Mr. Morrison," Brennan interjected, "we appreciate your desire to help, but this is a police matter. Detective Delgado has jurisdiction here, and he's shown proper documentation of his marriage to this woman." "And I've shown proper documentation of mine," Jack countered. "Seems like we have a legal dispute that should be settled in court, not at gunpoint on my property." Marcus's hand had indeed drifted to his service weapon, a movement so subtle that the deputies might not have noticed, but one that sent ice through Eleanor's veins. She recognized that gesture. It was the same threatening posture he'd used during their worst fights, the unspoken promise of violence that had kept her compliant for years. "Jack," Marcus said, his voice taking on the reasonable tone of a professional, trying to de-escalate a situation. "I understand you want to help Elena. She's very convincing when she's having an episode, but she needs medical attention, not enablement of her delusions." "The only delusion here," Elena said, finding her voice despite her terror, "is the idea that I'll ever go anywhere with you again." Marcus's mask slipped again, revealing the cold fury that had always lurked beneath his professional exterior. "Elena, sweetheart, you're having another episode. Dr. Williams specifically warned about this kind of paranoid behavior." Elena felt a sharp pain low in her abdomen, her body responding to stress in ways that terrified her. At 8 months pregnant, any complications could be dangerous for both her and the baby. "She's in labor," Rosa said sharply, moving to Elena's side as another contraction made her double over. "The baby is coming." "That's convenient," Marcus said, his skepticism clear. "Another manipulation tactic. Elena's very good at creating medical emergencies when she doesn't want to cooperate." Dr. Chen's truck appeared on the horizon, summoned by Miguel's quick thinking when he'd seen the police cars arrive. But Elena realized with growing horror that even Dr. Chen's presence might not help. Marcus could simply claim that Elena's current doctor was also being manipulated by her delusions. "We need to get her to the hospital," Dr. Chen said, after a quick examination revealed that Elena's contractions were indeed real and progressing rapidly. "This baby's coming whether we're ready or not." "Perfect," Marcus said. "I'll escort Elena to the hospital myself. Once she's in proper medical care, we can sort out this confusion about her identity." Elena gripped Jack's arm, her fingernails digging into his skin as another contraction hit. "Don't let him take me," she whispered. "Please, Jack. He'll make me disappear." Jack's jaw tightened as he made a decision that would change everything. He reached into his vest again, this time withdrawing something that made everyone in the yard freeze with surprise. It was a military medal, the Distinguished Service Cross, one of the highest honors the Army could bestow. Attached to the medal was a card with Jack's photograph and military identification. Captain John Morrison, 1st Special Forces Group, multiple combat deployments, classified operations throughout the Middle East. "Gentlemen," Jack said quietly, "before we go any further, I think you should know who you're dealing with." The revelation hit the assembled officers like a thunderbolt. Marcus's confidence wavered as he processed the implications of Jack's military background. Special Forces didn't just mean combat experience, it meant training in unconventional warfare, intelligence gathering, and operations that existed in legal gray areas. 23 years of service, Jack continued, his voice carrying new authority. Retired with full honors and a security clearance that's still active. I've spent the last 15 years building a legitimate business empire, but I still have contacts in places that might interest you, Detective Delgado. Elena watched Marcus's face as he recalculated the threat assessment. He'd expected to intimidate a simple rancher into compliance, but Jack Morrison was revealing himself to be something far more dangerous, a trained soldier with resources and connections that could potentially expose whatever corruption Marcus had used to build his case against Elena. "That's all very impressive," Marcus said, though his voice had lost its earlier commanding tone. "But it doesn't change the fact that Elena needs medical attention and psychological evaluation." Another contraction hit Elena, this one strong, enough to make her cry out. Dr. Chen checked her pulse and blood pressure, her professional concern evident. "Blood pressure's spiking," she announced. "We need to get her somewhere she can deliver safely, and we need to do it now." "She's not going anywhere with him," Jack said firmly, gesturing toward Marcus. "If Elena needs medical care, she'll get it here or at the local hospital with her chosen physician." "That's not your decision to make," one of the deputies said. Finally speaking up, "Detective Delgado has shown proper identification and documentation. If this is his wife—" "If," Jack interrupted. "That's a big word, Deputy. Because I have evidence that suggests Detective Delgado's documentation might not tell the whole story." Jack pulled out his phone and speed-dialed a number that connected immediately. Elena couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but she could see the effect Jack's conversation was having on Marcus, whose face was growing pale. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Internal Affairs Division," Jack said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'd like to report a police officer who may be using his position to stalk and harass a domestic violence victim." Marcus's hand moved toward his weapon again, but he was now outnumbered by his own backup, the deputies, who were beginning to question whether they were witnessing a legitimate police operation or something far more troubling. "Jack Morrison, Special Forces, retired," Jack continued into the phone. "I have a situation here that requires immediate federal oversight. A Houston detective is attempting to remove a pregnant domestic violence victim from protective custody using falsified medical records and psychological evaluations." Elena felt a surge of hope as she watched Marcus's authority crumble. Jack hadn't just been preparing to protect her physically, he'd been building a legal case that could expose Marcus's corruption and abuse of power. "Elena," Dr. Chen said, "urgently, I don't care about the politics here, but this baby is coming fast. We need to make a decision about where you're going to deliver." Elena looked at Jack, who was still on the phone with federal authorities, then at Marcus, whose fury was barely contained behind his professional mask. She thought about the nursery they'd prepared together, the life they'd built, and the daughter, who deserved to be born into love rather than conflict. "Here," Eleanor said firmly, "I'm having my baby here, in my home, with my husband and my doctor." Marcus stepped forward aggressively, his patience finally exhausted. "That's enough. Eleanor, you're coming with me right now, or I'll arrest everyone here for interfering with police business and kidnapping." The threat hung in the air like a challenge, and Elena realized that despite Jack's revelations and phone calls, they were still facing an armed police officer who was willing to use violence to reclaim what he considered his property. "Over my dead body," Jack said quietly, ending his phone call and pocketing the device. Elena felt her daughter kick vigorously inside her, as if responding to the tension surrounding her impending birth. In a few hours, she would bring new life into this world. But first, they would all have to survive the storm that was about to break over Lone Star Ranch. The military medal caught the sunlight as Jack moved protectively closer to Elena, its ribbon bright against his shirt. Elena had never known about his military service, but now she understood the quiet confidence she'd always sensed in him, the way he approached problems with tactical precision rather than emotional reaction. Their daughter was going to be born into a family of fighters, people who understood that some things were worth any risk to protect. Elena just hoped they would all survive long enough to hold her. The standoff shattered when Elena's water broke, the sudden rush of fluid down her legs creating urgency that transcended all political maneuvering. Dr. Chen immediately shifted into full medical mode, her authority as a physician overriding every other consideration. "Everyone inside now," she commanded, supporting Elena as another powerful contraction made her double over. "This baby is coming within the hour, and I won't deliver a child in a ranch yard surrounded by armed men." Marcus stepped forward to block their path to the house. "Elena goes to the hospital with proper medical supervision, not some country doctor playing midwife. I am a board-certified obstetrician with 30 years of experience," Dr. Chen snapped, her professional pride overriding any deference to his badge. "And right now, moving this woman anywhere, except into the nearest bed, could kill both her and her baby." Eleanor felt another contraction building, stronger than any before, and her knees buckled with the intensity. Jack caught her immediately, lifting her into his arms with the careful strength of a man accustomed to carrying wounded comrades. "Rosa, prepare the master bedroom," Jack called over his shoulder as he carried Elena toward the house. "Clean sheets, hot water, whatever Dr. Chen needs." "You're not taking her anywhere," Marcus snarled, drawing his service weapon and pointing it directly at Jack's chest. "Put her down and step away." The two deputies immediately drew their own weapons, but their targeting was confused. They'd been told they were helping rescue a disturbed woman, but now they were watching a police detective threaten to shoot a pregnant woman and the man trying to help her. "Detective Delgado," one of the deputies said carefully. Maybe we should let the medical situation stabilize before I give the orders here. Marcus cut him off, his mask of professional courtesy finally slipping completely. Elena belongs to me, and no one is taking what's mine. Elena's temporary wedding ring, the simple gold band Jack had placed on her finger at the courthouse, caught the sunlight as she gripped his shoulder through another contraction. It had started as a symbol of protection, but now it represented something far more precious, the choice to love and be loved freely. She doesn't belong to anyone, Jack said quietly, his voice carrying the deadly calm of a trained soldier under fire. Elena is a free woman, married to me by her own choice, carrying our daughter. Our daughter? Marcus laughed harshly. That bastard child belongs to whoever raped her. Elena was already damaged goods when I married her. The casual cruelty of thee... His words sent rage through Eleanor, even as another contraction peaked. She thought of all the nights she'd endured his violence, all the times he'd made her feel worthless and broken. But now, surrounded by people who truly cared about her welfare, his power to hurt her with words felt diminished. She's not damaged, Jack said, his eyes never leaving Marcus's weapon. She's the strongest person I've ever met, and she deserves better than a man who mistakes control for love. Miguel appeared from behind the barn, moving with the silent precision of a man who'd spent decades working cattle and understood predator behavior. He carried a shotgun, with the casual familiarity of someone for whom firearms were tools, rather than weapons of intimidation. "Boss," Miguel called quietly. "Federal vehicles just turned onto the property. 3 cars, moving fast." Marcus's head snapped toward the road, his confidence wavering as he spotted the approaching vehicles. Jack's phone call had apparently carried more weight than anyone had expected. "Eleanor," Dr. Chen said urgently, "I can see the baby's head. We need to get you inside immediately, or you're delivering this child right here in the dirt." Eleanor felt the overwhelming urge to push, her body taking control despite the chaos surrounding her. "Jack," she gasped, "I can't wait. The baby's coming now." Jack looked at the approaching federal vehicles, at Marcus's wavering gun, at Eleanor's desperate need for immediate medical care. In that moment, all his military training coalesced into a single tactical decision. "Miguel, cover Dr. Chen and Elena," Jack ordered, his voice carrying the authority of command. "Rosa, call for an ambulance backup. Deputies, you might want to consider which side of this you're really on." Marcus's gun hand shook as he realized his carefully planned operation was disintegrating. The approaching federal agents would have questions he couldn't answer, evidence he couldn't explain, and connections to corruption investigations that could destroy his career and freedom. "This isn't over," Marcus snarled at Elena, but his words carried the desperation of a man whose power was slipping away. "You can't hide forever." Elena's response was cut off by the most powerful contraction yet, her body demanding immediate attention that transcended every other consideration. As Jack carried her toward the house, she caught sight of her ring again, no longer just a symbol of protection, but proof that she'd found the courage to choose love over fear. Their daughter was about to be born into a world where her mother had finally learned to fight back, and her father had proven that some things were worth any risk to defend. The federal agents were less than 2 minutes away. Marcus's authority was crumbling, and Elena Morrison was about to become a mother on her own terms, in her own home, surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. The ring glinted one final time in the Texas sunlight before they disappeared into the house, where the real business of bringing new life into the world could finally begin. The master bedroom became a sanctuary of focused intensity as Dr. Chen took command of the medical emergency. Elena lay on the bed she'd never shared with Jack, surrounded by the people who'd become her chosen family, while outside the chaos of Marcus's collapsing authority continued to unfold. "Push when you feel the next contraction," Dr. Chen instructed, her hands steady despite the extraordinary circumstances. Rosa, I need those towels and more hot water. Jack, stay right there where Elena can see you. Elena gripped Jack's hand with desperate strength as another contraction built to its peak. Through the bedroom window, she could hear the sound of federal agents taking control of the situation outside, Marcus's voice growing increasingly agitated as his story fell apart. Under professional scrutiny, I can see her head, Dr. Chen announced with satisfaction. Elena, your daughter is almost here. One more big push. Jack watched Elena's face transform with the primal intensity of birth, seeing a strength and determination that humbled him. Completely, this woman who'd arrived at his gates broken and desperate was now bringing their daughter into the world with courage that redefined everything he thought he knew about bravery. She's beautiful, Jack whispered, as their baby's head emerged, dark hair matted and eyes squeezed shut against the brightness of the world. Elena, she's perfect. Elena pushed again with everything she had, feeling her daughter slip free into Dr. Chen's waiting hands. The relief was overwhelming, followed immediately by the most profound joy she'd ever experienced. Their baby girl drew her first breath and immediately announced her displeasure with the world in a strong, healthy cry. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a voice that could wake the dead. Dr. Chen laughed, quickly clearing the baby's airways and checking her vital signs. She's absolutely perfect. Jack felt tears streaming down his face as Dr. Chen placed their daughter in Elena's arms. The baby was tiny but fierce, her little fists waving in indignation at being forced from her warm sanctuary. Elena looked down at her daughter with wonder that bordered on worship. "Hello, sweetheart," Elena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm your mama, and this is your daddy, and you're safe. You're finally safe." The baby's crying gradually subsided as she settled against Elena's chest, her instincts recognizing the heartbeat she'd listened to for 8 months. Jack reached out tentatively, stroking one perfect tiny hand with his finger, amazed when the baby's grip reflexively closed around it. "She knows you," Elena said softly. "She knows her daddy's voice." Dr. Chen worked efficiently to complete the delivery and ensure both mother and baby were stable. "Elena, you did beautifully. The baby's vitals are excellent, and you're both going to be just fine." Outside, the confrontation had reached its conclusion. Through the window, Jack could see Marcus in handcuffs, being escorted to a federal vehicle while Brennan's credentials were being confiscated. The deputies who'd accompanied them were giving statements to federal agents, their confusion evident as the true nature of Marcus's operation became clear. Miguel appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with joy despite the morning's drama. "Boss, the federal agents want to speak with you when you're ready, but they said to tell you that Detective Delgado is being charged with stalking, harassment, and abuse of authority. They found evidence of other cases. Elena wasn't his first victim." Elena felt a weight she'd carried for years, finally lifting from her shoulders. Marcus's power to hurt her was broken, not just by Jack's protection, but by the system finally, working as it should when honest people were willing to stand up for what was right. "What do we name her?" Jack asked, studying their daughter's perfect features. Elena had been thinking about this question for weeks, but now, holding her baby, in the room where she'd found safety and love, the answer seemed obvious. "Hope," she said firmly. "Hope Morrison. Because that's what she represents. Hope for a better future." Jack's smile was radiant as he leaned down to kiss Elena's forehead. "Hope Morrison. It's perfect." Rosa bustled into the room with fresh linens and a basin of warm water, her eyes immediately filling with tears at the sight of the new family. "Dios mío, she's an angel, a beautiful angel." Dr. Chen finished her examination and began cleaning up her medical supplies. "I want to see both of you in my office next week for follow-up, but everything looks excellent. Elena, you should rest. Now, birth is exhausting work." As if summoned by Dr. Chen's words, Elena felt fatigue wash over her like a tide. But it was a clean exhaustion. the satisfied tiredness of someone who'd accomplished something magnificent rather than simply survived another day. Jack took his first photograph of Hope, a simple snapshot with his phone that captured her tiny face, peaceful in sleep. The image would become the centerpiece of their family gallery, proof of the moment when their fractured lives became whole. "She's going to grow up here," Elena said dreamily, looking around the room that had become the birthplace of their daughter's story. "She'll know this ranch, this land, these people who protected us. She'll know she's loved," Jack added, his voice thick with emotion. "Every single day of her life, she'll know she's wanted and loved and safe." Hope Morrison slept peacefully, in her mother's arms, unaware that she'd been born into a family forged by courage rather than convenience, protected by love rather than law, and strengthened by the choice to fight for what mattered most. Outside, the Texas sun climbed higher, into a clear sky, promising another beautiful day in a life that had finally found its way home. 6 months later, Lone Star Ranch glowed with the warmth of autumn sunshine and the contentment that came from dreams fulfilled. Elena stood on the wraparound porch, baby Hope balanced on her hip, watching Jack and Miguel work with the new colts in the training paddock. The ranch had prospered under their joint management, Elena's business instincts complementing Jack's operational expertise in ways that surprised even Rosa. Hope Morrison was a joy to behold, a healthy, alert baby with her mother's dark eyes and her father's determined chin. She'd claimed every heart on the ranch from her first day, but none more completely than Jack's. Watching him with their daughter, Eleanor often marveled at how naturally fatherhood had come to him, as if he'd been preparing for this role his entire life. "She's getting heavy," Rosa observed, emerging from the kitchen with 2 glasses of sweet tea. At 6 months old, Hope was growing rapidly, her sturdy frame promising the kind of strength that came from good nutrition and abundant love. "She's perfect," Elena replied, accepting the tea gratefully. "Dr. Chen says she's in the 95th percentile for height and weight. She's going to be tall like Jack." The legal proceedings against Marcus had concluded 3 weeks ago, with his conviction on federal charges of stalking, harassment, and abuse of authority. The FBI investigation had uncovered a pattern of behavior spanning multiple victims, women who'd been too frightened or isolated to report his crimes. Elena's courage in fighting back had given others the strength to come forward, ultimately ensuring Marcus would spend the next 15 years in federal prison. "Miguel says Jack is planning something special for tonight," Rosa said with the knowing smile of someone who'd been keeping secrets. "Something about making your marriage official in the eyes of God and the community." Eleanor's heart skipped as she realized what Rosa was suggesting. She and Jack had talked about renewing their vows properly, celebrating their love with the kind of ceremony that honored what they'd built together. Their courthouse wedding had been about survival and protection. This celebration would be about choice and joy. "Is that why the whole county seems to be planning to show up today?" Elena asked, noting the unusual amount of activity around the ranch. "Might be," Rosa said innocently. "Or it might be that people want to celebrate Hope's baptism and the fact that the Morrison family has finally found its way back to happiness." As if summoned by her name, Hope began fussing for her afternoon feeding. Elena settled into the porch, swing that Jack had installed after Hope's birth, nursing their daughter while watching the man who'd become the center of her world work with quiet competence and obvious contentment. The photographer arrived around 3 o'clock, a professional from San Antonio who specialized in family portraits. Jack had commissioned a formal family photograph, their first official picture as the Morrisons, to be displayed in the main room where Sarah's memory had finally found peace alongside their new beginning. Mrs. Morrison, the photographer, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, approached the porch with her equipment. "I'm Martha Sullivan. Your husband arranged for some family portraits today." Elena looked down at her simple blue dress, one of Sarah's that Rosa had altered perfectly, and felt a moment of nervousness. "I hope we look presentable enough." "You look like a family," Martha said warmly. "That's all any portrait really needs to capture." The session was more relaxed than Elena had expected. Hope was cooperative and alert, fascinated by the camera's clicking sounds. Jack wore a clean white shirt and his father's pocket watch, the chain visible across his vest in a nod to family tradition. Elena had chosen to wear her grandmother's pearl earrings, small treasures she'd managed to save from her old life. "Can we get one by the ranch gates?" Jack suggested as the session wound down. That's where our story really began. Standing at the iron gates where Elena had collapsed 8 months ago, holding their healthy daughter while Jack's arm wrapped securely around her waist, Elena felt the profound completion of a journey she could never have imagined when she'd taken those first desperate steps onto Morrison land. "Perfect," Martha announced, reviewing the final shots on her camera. "You'll have these within the week." As evening approached, vehicles began arriving for what Rosa had finally admitted was a combination celebration. Hope's informal baptism, Elena and Jack's vow renewal, and the community's official welcome of the Morrison family. The guest list included Dr. Chen, Judge Harrison, Miguel and Rosa's extended family, neighboring ranchers, and even some of Jack's former military colleagues who'd driven from across the state. "I can't believe you organized all this," Elena said as Jack helped her dress for the ceremony. She wore a simple white dress that accommodated nursing while still managing to look elegant, and Jack had surprised her with a stunning necklace that had belonged to his grandmother. "I wanted the whole world to know how proud I am to be your husband and Hope's father," Jack replied, straightening his tie in their bedroom mirror. "No more courthouse ceremonies or emergency arrangements. Tonight we celebrate what we've chosen, to build together." The ceremony took place in the main pasture as the sun set over the Texas landscape they both loved. Judge Harrison performed the vow renewal while Dr. Chen held Hope, who seemed fascinated by the gathering of people who'd come to celebrate her family's happiness. "Elena Morrison," Jack said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. 6 months ago, I married you to protect you. Tonight I marry you because I choose to love you for the rest of my life." "Jack Morrison," Elena replied, her voice strong and clear. "You gave me sanctuary when I needed shelter, but you gave me something more precious. You gave me the courage to believe I deserved love." When Judge Harrison pronounced them husband and wife again and always, the cheer that went up from their friends and neighbors seemed to echo across the entire ranch. Hope contributed her own pleased gurgle, as if approving of the proceedings. The family portrait session had produced exactly what Martha promised, images that captured not just faces, but the essence of what they'd become. The formal photograph that would hang in their living room showed 3 people who belonged together completely. Jack, with his quiet strength and gentle eyes, Elena, with her serene confidence and radiant joy, and Hope, with her alert curiosity and perfect contentment. But Elena's favorite photo from that day was simpler, a candid shot Martha had taken during the ceremony, showing Jack holding Hope while Elena adjusted the baby's christening gown. It captured a moment of pure family intimacy, the kind of everyday tenderness that would define their daughter's childhood. "Look at her," Elena said that night as they prepared for bed, Hope sleeping peacefully in the nursery they decorated. "Together. She has no idea what it means to be afraid, what it feels like to not be wanted." "That's exactly how it should be," Jack replied, pulling Elena close as they stood in the doorway watching their daughter sleep. "She'll grow up knowing she's loved unconditionally, that she has parents who fight for each other and for her." Elena rested her head against Jack's chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that had become her favorite sound in the world. Above the nursery door, the new family portrait caught the hallway light, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, hope over despair, and family over everything else. Hope Morrison slept peacefully under the protection of parents who'd learned that the strongest foundations were built not from perfection, but from the courage to heal together and the wisdom to fight for what mattered most. Outside, The Texas night stretched endlessly toward a future bright with possibility. While inside Lone Star Ranch, three hearts beat in the perfect rhythm of home.